Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse. And yes, it is July 1st. Happy Canada Day, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So we've got a show themed on that. But yes, it's Canada Day up here with the fireworks and the parade and all that kind of stuff. And even debate in some cities in Canada about calling it Canada Day anymore, thinking it's a little too nationalistic, freedom, that whole thing that showed up in Ottawa. So pretty interesting. So yeah, they're having talks that it's just like the American flag and the Canadian flag are kind of getting usurped for other means, and pretty strange, but considered almost too nationalistic calling it Canada Day anymore.
Yeah, I mean, because we have ours coming up in a couple of days, July 4th, and we don't call it USA Day, but I mean, who cares what you call it, right? It's all about how you celebrate it. Man, everybody's got to complain about something these days, and should we call that? Whatever. Anyway, Martin, I don't know how the weather is by you today, but not a cloud in the sky. Going to hit 90 here today.
Oh wow, good for you. Yeah, no, kind of overcast here, kind of a little cool. Got out for a jog yesterday. But yeah, it's just good weather for Canada Day. So
there you go. So in celebration of Canada Day today, we decided to talk about our favorite Canadian debut albums, Canadian bands, first albums. Could be, kind of any of the genres we normally talk about here on the channel. We had a long list to choose from. Martin and I were kind of going back and picking and choosing. We've each identified 10. I'm sure we have some honorable mentions at the end. So and again, these are not our favorite 10 Canadian bands. All right, let me reiterate. These are our favorite debuts. Some of these bands certainly might be in our group of favorites, but sometimes a great debut is a great debut regardless, right? Doesn't mean that you love the rest of the catalog, but that debut is extra special. So with all that in mind, Martin will kick us off with his number 10.
Yes, exactly. I usually resist. I get requests all the time. Oh, why don't you do a book on Canadian rock and stuff like that? And I always kind of resist this whole thing about Canada's border being, anything particularly special about the bands from Canada or sounding a certain way. It's just not the case. It's just another country. It happens to be an English-speaking country, so it gets talked about a lot, as does Britain, of course, and the U.S. And then, there's big steps down from there to Germany or whatever. But yeah, I thought it was a little more meat on the bone rather than just say favorite Canadian bands or anything like that, or even favorite Canadian albums. This idea about debuts, because there are a lot of my favorite Canadian bands who didn't have that great a debut, but this is all about those debut albums and why they're great. So I'm going to start with the Diodes. Our only heavy, well recorded, actually only heavy punk album from Canada early on. This is 1977. These are all actually, they signed it all when they did a reunion. But this was a good album put out on CBS in Canada. Like I say, very well recorded, quite heavy. And we always used to complain as angry young metalheads that there wasn't very much, heavy punk out of Canada. But this certainly was. And unfortunately, after that, they put out a couple of albums, like a lot of punk bands went arty and new wave and post-punk, and these guys did as well. This is the only album that Pete Pardo would even have a modicum of a chance of appreciating. I think the next two you absolutely wouldn't, but this one's kind of rocking, kind of power chorded. So there you go, the Diodes.
So the angry young metalhead in me would be like, yeah, maybe not on some of these, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, I'm going to go, my first pick, I'm going way back. This is the oldest one on my list here. So this is the debut from, and again, I think this band is like half Canadian, half American. So they kind of count. Most people always seem to lump these in with Canadian bands. Steppenwolf, self-titled debut from 1968, John Kay. Right, it was John Kay and one other guy were Canadian?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's it.
That's what I thought. Steppenwolf, very, very popular band, hard rock band, psychedelic band, whatever the hell you want to call them, right? They were one of the earlier, somewhat heavy bands, I guess. But this album, very raw, contains a couple of their most well-known songs. Of course, Born to Be Wild is on this particular album, and that makes this album kind of legendary because arguably some people call it the first heavy metal song, the first time heavy metal is is talked about. And yeah, I mean, Sookie Sookie is a terrific song. The Pusher is great. Much of the rest of it, you got his kind of bluesy, psychedelic late 60s hard rock, everybody's next one, Hoochie Coochie Man. Everybody did Hoochie Coochie Man back in the day. Desperation, but a really good raucous band that had a really strong following for pretty much throughout their career. And I think, they're still playing to this day, John Kay and Steppenwolf? I mean,
I think so. Yeah.
He's got to be close to 80 years old at this point, right?
Yeah, one of the neat things about that band is Danny Johnson from Derringer was or is their guitarist. I mean, he was part of that whole thing, kind of like Bruce Kulick being in Grand Funk, right?
Yeah, I know. Isn't that weird, right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, various guys from Steppenwolf moved on to other bands and other big, supergroup projects and stuff over the years. But John Kay kind of kept the thing going throughout, many years. They would break up for a little bit, get back together. It seemed like there was always a Steppenwolf around doing something. So it just goes to show you his dedication. And again, maybe a guy that we could have talked about on the show we did recently, where we talked about those MVP guys. I mean, John Kay's another one, right? I mean, he kept this band going through thick and thin, and a pretty big selling band for a number of years. But they had that like peak era from like 68 till about 72, 73, with a lot of albums, really good live album. But yeah, that's my first choice. Steppenwolf, again, Canadian bands or half Canadian band that most people just always seem to lump into, like one of those California bands or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that Steppenwolf Gold, the double live Three Dog Night album, and one of the CCRs, I think was Pendulum, were the first three rock albums I ever got before I discovered heavy rock.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
And Steppenwolf, I mean, that was pretty creepy. Born to Be Wild, Magic Carpet Ride with that crazy guitar squall that starts the whole thing off, and then it gets really catchy but still a pretty cool song. And I think one of the reasons they were considered a proto heavy metal band also was a fairly extreme vocal out of that guy. But yeah. But I was never much of a fan. I mean, I have this wall that goes up with acid rock, psych rock, acid rock. I was never a big Iron Butterfly guy or a Steppenwolf guy. But yeah, definitely a pretty important band. My next choice is Voivod, Warren Payne. People really forget how, if you think of punk rock as abstract art, this is pretty abstract as well. And it's got a little bit of that throughput from Venom and Bathory and Celtic Frost, right? So pretty extreme and really cool that Away is in doing this artwork, and it's got the whole storyline with the fears of nuclear war and intergalactic battles and all that. But yeah, Quebec band that was, this really impressed a lot of people, even though it's so noisy and brash. And then obviously they changed over time and became more of a progressive. I mean, I don't even know if you'd ever call them even a progressive metal band. They're still almost too heavy for even that.
Yeah, they're one of those bands that just defies classification. Right?
Yeah, really cool. And great debut. They're on Bonsai Records to begin with, right? And that whole Michelle Mies debacle about how legit was that label, and how legit were they when they were releasing all this German thrash, like all these cool obscurities over here in Canada. But this was one of the rare Canadian bands that was on with them. So.
Yeah, when Martin and I were both putting our list together and kind of sharing our thoughts on this, I had that on my list as well to possibly talk about. But I'm not a huge fan of the debut personally. For all the reasons you said, it is really noisy and brash, and I think they got a little bit more sophisticated very shortly thereafter. I like it. I like that kind of the next era of the band just a little bit more. But I mean, Ryan Scow from the Hudson Valley Squares, I mean, he loves that debut album to death, and I like it. I like the energy of it. But I remember when that first came out, it was kind of like, to me, I always thought those first like 2, maybe 3 Voivod albums were like cyberkinetic Venom almost in a weird way, I mean, it's just that they kind of hit me the same way, but
with some English as second language thrown in, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, my next one from 1993. So technically they had like a demo album before this one, but then they got signed. They kind of re-recorded a lot of the material on that first demo and released their first official album, which is called Splendor Solace, and talking about the Tea Party. And I know Martin is not as huge a fan of this one as some of their later stuff, and I get it. I like the kind of so everything I said I didn't like about the Voivod, I like about this, right? So I like the rawness of this, and I think this is pretty kind of heavy, Zeppelin-y, culty, Middle Eastern-y kind of heavy rock. And I think one of the biggest regrets that I have, like musically speaking, of the last like kind of 30 years or so, is that I didn't latch onto this band or even find out about them early on, because I would have loved to have been a part of the Tea Party as they were kind of getting their start, rather than getting into them and really finding out about them, all these years later, like just the last couple of years. But I love the big Jimmy Page style riffs on here. I mean, I think the singer guitar player in this band, he's just absolutely a brilliant player. Jeff Martin, really, really good player. Love his the songwriting, the drumming. I mean, I love these Tea Party albums, and I really dig that kind of like epic Middle Eastern type of big heavy rock thing that's like kind of floating around in their music. And then they got the industrial element coming in a couple albums. It's just a really cool band. And yeah, Tea Party, Splendor Solace.
Cool. Yeah. My stupid opinion on Tea Party is that, but part of being Canadian and having a relationship to Canadian music is that your first reaction is you always put it down, right? You're scarred by the whole idea of CanCon, and how there were these radio laws and trying to push Canadian music, and you saw a lot of Canadian things get really promoted and hyped, right? And then you had, we have a situation here where all the major labels are in Canada, but sometimes those major label signings are local major label Canadian signings. So you're always like, but they're not really good enough to get signed in the States and all that kind of stuff, right? And so Tea Party, it was like, I found that album like gimmicky and pretentious. And then by the next album, it's like, oh, they're actually complete geniuses. They're one of the greatest bands of all time.
See how quickly your mind changed.
So as soon as you start with Edges of Twilight, and every single record after are like some of the greatest, beautifully crafted, well-written literary albums ever made. But for one record, I thought I was completely turned off by them, right? And then after that, one of my favorite, well, let's not go so far as one of my favorite bands of all time, because we say that way too much. And
you like them a lot. You like them a lot.
Yeah, they're amazing. Even if they're not one of my favorite bands of all time, I will use that word genius for those guys. I will do that. So there you go.
I would agree with you. Yeah.
All right. My next one, apparently I don't own a copy of it anymore. Moxie, I'm going to go with. So this is 75, I believe, 76 even. Hang on. It might be 76. I know in your notes, you were thinking it was earlier 74. Than that.
Yep. 74.
No, I think it's later than that. Later than that. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, so it says 75 on the CD. Wikipedia, I think, said 74. Whatever.
I think somewhere else you see 76, and which would make sense. So, although, hang on, Riding High 77. So, yeah.
When did Tommy Bolin die? Because he died in 76.
Yeah, it's right in there. So, yeah, you can tell that story, because I know this is a more on that later one for you, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, what I like about this album, and I'll keep it brief, is it is a very heavy, well put together album. For a Canadian band as of that time. It's big, it's riffy. It's a lot of Moxie fans' favorite album. I certainly will go with Riding High over that album, but it would be my second. But it is a good, well put together, big, Stormin' Stonkin', Zeppelin-esque, meaty, heavy metal album, and very professional for its day. So yeah, Moxie 1.
Wikipedia says 75.
Okay.
And then Moxie 2, 76. So I guess that makes sense. We'll get into the whole Tommy Bolin thing, but it's a great album. More on that later. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. My next one, number 8, is the self-titled debut from Max Webster from 1976. Martin, what else do they call this album? There's like another nickname for this, right? The
Hangover.
Hangover.
Call it Hangover, or Blockheads.
Blockheads, something like that, right? Really funny album cover. I always thought really cool. Yeah, I mean, this is Max Webster still trying to kind of find their sound. I think they again kind of similar to what we were talking about with both the Tea Party and Voivod. Band's debut album, good, solid, but they would get more refined going forward. But I still find a lot to love on this album. I think Hangover and Here Among the Cats are two great songs to kick off this album. Both have that kind of quirky sense of melody that this band always brought to the table. Kim Mitchell's guitar playing is all over this album. Toronto Tontos is weird and a lot of fun. Coming Off the Moon is great. I think Lily is tremendous. Great way that this band showed their kind of prog tendencies. And the rest of the songs are, maybe not as developed as stuff that they would come up with later on, but still a good, solid record, a great debut. And they would only get better after this. And Martin and I have talked plenty about Max Webster here on the show. And if you've never listened to them, you talk genius, right, Martin? I mean, bunch of genius.
Yeah, pretty darn close. Yeah. Not Tea Party genius, but definitely
it's just different, right? Yeah. But just a cool band. It's very hard to classify. Are they hard rock? Are they prog? Are they pop? Are they what? It's almost like they just play Max Webster music, and it's really all you need to know. Overshadowed, of course, by the great band Rush, who they always seem to pal around with and always toured with. But Rush got all the acclaim, and Max Webster kind of just got relegated to that fun little obscure band that most people say, "Oh, I heard of them," or "I saw them open for Rush once." Don't own any of their albums though. So if you don't have any of them, I wouldn't say the debut is the best place to start, but it's definitely a really, really solid debut, and I like it a lot. So that's my pick.
Cool. All right. More on that later. My number 7, Subhumans. That's not the correct title or cover. This is a collection with everything. But basically, the debut was, I think it's 1980. It was called Incorrect Thoughts. And this is one of the two good, heavy, riffy Vancouver punk bands. It was a well-recorded album as well. Just a really cool album with a lot of cool hits, had great singles off it as well. Late into the punk game, so it was always discounted. I personally discounted it because to me, 1977 was the year when all that stuff was really important. And all these Johnny Come Latelys, at least there was an improvement and there was a metalness to what they did. But yeah, there's a picture of the band all standing on a Vancouver bus, and it was called Incorrect Thoughts. So yeah, pretty cool band, Vancouver band.
Cool. All right, let's go to Full On Prog now from 1977. Yeah, it seems like a lot of these albums are right around the same time period we're talking about here. FM, Black Noise. Kind of like a minor prog classic to most people who are really into this style of music. Starting off as a trio, Cameron Hawkins on all sorts of synths and keyboards and vocals and bass, Martin Deller on drums, percussion, and this kind of interesting guy named Nash the Slash, who played electric violin, electric mandolin, sang a little bit as well. Really, really fun album that if you like stuff from this time period, like Yes and Star Castle and that sort of ELP, that sort of thing, big, bombastic, loads of synths, really great melodies too. They're not one of the more rockin' prog bands, but very kind of symphonic and kind of spacey at times. I mean, Phasers on Stun is a terrific song. Dialing for Dharma is great. Slaughter on Robot Village, really cool instrumental. The title track Black Noise is awesome. Kind of longish songs, lots of instrumental passages, but great melodies. I think these guys probably could have been, and they actually dipped more into kind of like pop waters later on, but you can kind of hear the seeds of that on this album. But most people, when you talk about FM, and again, there's another FM, not to be confused with the melodic rock band that came later, but most people cite this as their best album. It's their debut. So Black Noise from FM.
As I've said before, those records are sitting in my collection. I just don't know them well enough. It's another band that I've got to learn at one point. It's crazy. Okay, so my next choice is Tease with the Tease debut. There's my now fully signed from the trip to Windsor to see them on the reunion tour, or reunion show. Amazing singing, amazing production. Brian Danter, 71 years old now, singing amazing, like super powerful, like a Graham Bonnet still. 4 original members are all still around. But yeah, this was recorded somewhat as a demo, or as Mike Kozak told me, when I was down there, it was recorded in 19 hours, but it sounds like a fully professional, kind of like a cross between Kiss and Ted Nugent. Just well recorded, good beefy songs, Boys Night Out, Hot to Trot, Flames Keep Growing, rocking with the music, and the songs come alive even more on the Tour of Japan album that they did. And then the second album after this, On the Loose, from 77, this is 76, is amazing as well. So yeah, wow, crazy glammy cover. But, as a kid in 76, you'd look at that and pretty much ascertain that it was pretty heavy as well.
Yeah.
It's what they look like on back. And it's a good heavy album, possibly not as heavy as the Moxie album, but pretty darn heavy for Canadian albums.
Well, I only have the live Japan album. That's the one with the airplane on the front, right?
Yeah.
I bought it. I probably listened to it a few times and then just put it away. And I probably need to go back to that, because I asked Martin recently. It's like, should I go investigate those early Tease studio albums? Because I know you rank them pretty highly. So I think what I need to do is go revisit that live album and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, there's only 4 in total. The first 2 are pretty heavy. The live album's the heaviest because it's a live album, it's heavy.
Yeah.
And then the next 2, they kind of dropped off and went kind of poppy and new wavy. They didn't quite know what to do. The label was kind of jerking them around. But a lot of people think the third one, One Night Stands, is the best one, 79, and then they did Body Shots of 80. So it's not a long catalog, not hard to check out.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so this next band is from Martin's neck of the woods. Their debut album, Astral Projector, came out in 1978. The band is called Zon.
Brought out my vinyl copy for you.
There we go. Look at that.
Gatefold.
Back here.
Here's your blue vinyl.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I got to admit, I had never heard of this band until maybe about a year ago. Sea of Tranquility's very own Rand Kelly from Curse of the Collector show actually turned me on to these guys. He's like, you ever listen to Zon? I know you're a big Styx fan. I'm like, I've never even heard of Zon before. So I went and listened to it, and I went and bought this immediately, and it has both their debut and their second album on it. Absolutely, if you're a fan of like 70s Styx, maybe Aviary, maybe throw a couple other bands in there. Really big vocal harmonies, lots of hooks, plenty of keyboards, nice crunchy guitars, melodies all over the place. It's just proggy enough. I don't know, Martin. I think I call these guys more like a pop band than a pure on prog band, right?
Yeah, there's similarities to Saga in a way, right?
Yeah, I would agree. But a lot of good songs. The vocalist is awesome. The vocalist kind of reminds me of Dennis DeYoung a little bit, but there's lots of synths on here. Great guitar work. The title track, Astral Projector, and Hollywood is great. Hollywood is great. I love Put on the Show. Again, it's one of those bands that I think I don't have enough history with yet, but I know that I love this. So it had to be on this list. So yeah, Astral Projector, Zon. If you like I said, late 70s kind of pomp, prog, hard rock type of thing, a must hear.
Yeah. Looking at that picture of the band, there's a real Max Webster vibe to it, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
No?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like Max Webster meets Thin Lizzy.
Yeah.
On real quick look.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So my next choice is a band I've talked about before fairly recently, Sons of Freedom. They are almost hard to describe, hard to categorize, kind of like hypnotic, massive rhythms, pretty heavy. They use repetition in a really cool way. They almost like lull you into a trance thing. I've talked about how I've seen them many times live in the college days, university days. One of the more memorable looks that they had, they got 3 guys in the band named Dawn. But one of the cool looks that they had is these lab coats, and the only lighting they had was an oversized swinging bare light bulb. It was really cool. But yeah, they have this massive sort of drum groove and big kind of stun bass, really cool lyrics, really kind of laconic, hypnotic, Kevin Moore style vocals, I would say, to them.
Wow.
Really interesting band. They only put out 3 albums, and the third one's kind of like an odds and sods. So there were only 2. The second one was called Gump. But this one, this one is basically called Sons of Freedom, but it's also, it goes by the title also about this: never retract, never retreat, never apologize, get the thing done and let them howl. Yeah, the song titles are Super Cool Wagon, The Criminal, Mona Lisa, Dead Dog on the Highway, The Holy Rollers, Judy Come Home, Is It Love, F the System, This Is Tao, and Alice Henderson. Produced by Matt Wallace and Sons of Freedom. Really, really cool. Cool. It's actually that kind of thing. It's a band that you'd look at them kind of like Tea Party and say, these guys are really cool. So that's a great thing about that. But yeah, impossible to describe, kind of like pre-grunge, fits in grunge, but in an odd way. A little bit, if you want to go down the coast to Faith No More and Jane's Addiction and Minutemen and that, you can Firehose, you can kind of put that in, cross it with grunge, and you might get this. Cross it with super heavy U2. There, that's enough weirdness to describe them. That should get somebody out there, curious to check these guys out.
Yeah, and I think you brought them up on another show a couple months ago. I can't remember which one, because I remember that album cover.
Yeah.
In fact, I might have even listened to that, I think, and I kind of liked it. Yeah, because I think you were saying that this might be a kind of like grunge era band that you hadn't heard before that you might like, and I do remember going and listening to it and kind of digging it. So. Yeah. All right, number 5 for me here from 1983, perhaps one of the most well-known of the Canadian metal bands, and I guess call this speed metal, I guess. Heavy Metal Maniac from Exciter. Yeah, I mean, at the time, this was pretty exciting stuff. Exciting Exciter, yes. I guess you would call this speed. This is kind of like proto thrash, but whereas I think Exciter didn't do a lot of the really ultra technical stuff as far as like guitar playing and things like that, but just full on speed and power. You had the kind of high pitched, kind of screechy vocals, but man, just infectious stuff. Those first 3 Exciter albums to me are just so good. Holocaust, Mistress of Evil, Under Attack, the title track, Heavy Metal Maniac, so good. Cry of the Banshee, love the song titles too. Black Witch, Rising of the Dead. This is just so early 80s. Just love it. I mean, quite frankly, the weird thing is that they're Canadian, because if you would have said that this was a British band straight from the new wave of British heavy metal, sure, right, fits in with just everything that was going on there. And I think they really got that vibe pretty well, considering they weren't an English band. So, and I always like the guy with the knife trying to slice open the Marshall amp and the Marshall speaker in the back. Brilliant stuff. Yeah, great album. Love it. Love these guys.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the cool things about them, I mean, I've interviewed those guys a bunch of times, and I can't remember the story because it's a long time ago, but I think their history goes back quite a ways before that record, which would put them as pretty important historically in the invention of thrash. But like you say, it's speed metal. The hi-hat's more open, the screaming's more out of control, the palm muting isn't there.
Right.
So it's like Anvil and Razor. That is one thing Canada has, is they have this kind of pretty rich early speed. You can put Voivod in there as well. They have this early kind of speed metal thing going on, and Exciter's right in there. But because Exciter goes way back, and they're named after Judas Priest song, and they were actually quite heavy, I believe they go back to at least 1979, and they may be one of the bands that they may even told me even earlier than that. But yeah, it's kind of cool that but they do sound they're definitely really loose bolted, and they're like all that early Shrapnel, Mike Varney sort of thing. They're part of that whole ilk.
They formed in 78. Actually, they formed together
in 78. So yeah, so formed in 78, and they were actually apparently, unlike a lot of these bands that were that started a lot more 70s sounding. Like there's a number of these UK and German bands. I know when you go listen to their old stuff, it sounds older. I think Exciter was kind of this heavy pretty early. So that's kind of cool. They're a big part of this whole thing, but definitely not thrash. They're definitely speed metal.
Right,
so,
right.
All right. So my number 4 is this record right here, Bachmann Turner Overdrive, Bachmann Turner Overdrive. There's your gatefold of it. This is one of the earliest records I've ever owned as well. So this goes past those first three I mentioned into when I first discovered harder rock, and this might have been the first hard rock record I ever got. I think I got this as a new release, and it's pretty heavy. It's not that hard. It's not that heavy, but again, just like Steppenwolf, a part of what delivers it to some form of heaviness is a fair bit of an extreme vocal that you would get out of Fred Turner, definitely not out of Randy Bachman, but it's fairly riffy, well recorded as well. And I've often said, I did a History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff podcast episode on honorary Southern rock albums, and this is my number one choice for an incredibly start to finish, lyrics, vocals, you name it, riffs, the mellow stuff, the heavy stuff. This sounds like an absolutely iconic, quintessential Southern rock album, and yet they're from Canada. Originally kind of like an offshoot from the Guess Who, so they're kind of Winnipeg based, and then they kind of move around and stuff. Big successful band. 3 or 4 gold records in the States, something like that. But yeah, that first album is almost as heavy as, it's in the same realm as 2 and Not Fragile, the other ones that are well regarded. But yeah, good album with Give Me Your Money Please as the opening track with good heavy ones. Stayed Awake All Night, covered by Crocus, right?
Yep.
Yep. And Hold Back the Water, Blue Collar, a little bit of the jazziness out of Randy on that. But good solid
Canadian. Good record, good, well-rounded, lots of variety on that album. I'd argue maybe that is their most well-rounded album out of all of them. Have maybe 1 or 2 that are maybe a little heavier, but great debut. Isn't it amazing how we got BTO out of kind of the Guess Who?
Yeah,
Guess Who are a fine band too, but not at all like BTO at all.
Yeah. And Brave Belt along the way
as well.
Rock,
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Not a great band.
But notable, I guess, for who was in it, right? It's just weird kind of country rock stuff. It's yeah.
Oh man, I don't know if I've ever mentioned the story, but I remember reading in Randy Bachman's really well put together autobiography.
Oh yeah.
He said in the Brave Belt days we were so broke, and they would. I think he said at one point they were like on tour out in the country in Edmonton, and and the brutal snowy blizzardy weather that they had there, they had to park by the side of the road or something and stay in a tent by the side of the highway and stuff. It's like these brutal stories about how broke they were and like malnutrition and the whole bit. But yeah, it's talk about paying your dues. He definitely did, especially after the success of Guess Who.
Yeah. Crazy that he had to go through that, after the success of Guess Who, right? Yeah, that was an amazing autobiography. I enjoyed that one immensely. There's so many good ones. All right, let's see, where are we? Number 4. How about what year is this? 1972. I was actually surprised at how far back this one was released. And again, just goes to show you how young Mr. Frank Marino was at the time. Maxum by Frank Marino, Mahogany Rush, or maybe just called Mahogany Rush at the time. So that's the debut album right here. Basically the blueprint of the latter period Jimi Hendrix Experience albums like Electric Ladyland and Axis Bold as Love. That's basically the first maybe 2 Mahogany Rush albums. This kind of like funky, jazzy, acid rock, guitar dominated music, with this really young teenage Frank Marino, with the long black hair and the big mustache and playing the Gibson SG, but loving his Hendrix, kind of continuing on with that. I think he kind of really got his own identity a couple albums in, definitely by the 4th album. But man, some great songs on here. The title track is great. Magic Man is terrific. There's this real funkiness to this album, which I like a lot. And it's got this really great production too for a debut album. It's like one of those kind of headphone albums where it's like you get all this weird shit going on all over back and forth. But yeah, Boardwalk Lady is terrific on here. The New Beginning, all really short songs too. This is not a long album by any means. Buddy's a great song. Funky Woman. Yeah. So that one right there, the start of Frank Marino, Mahogany Rush, and quite frankly, these are the first 3 albums here all of them very much in a similar vein, very kind of its time, very much that kind of like latter period Hendrix kind of like funky rock, acid rock type of thing. But I enjoy it quite a bit.
And very professional, all of those early albums.
Yeah, they sound great. Yeah, they sound really good.
They changed. You got a little heavier, a little riffier, some more blues stuck into things.
Yep.
The live albums well known. He had some success, definitely.
Oh yeah.
Good stuff. Okay, so my number 3, I went with Max Webster. And again, you said it perfectly. I mean, it does feel a little bit of a step down from the next, what is it, 4, I guess it is. But yeah, Hangover's an amazing song. Toronto Tontos is incredible. Some comedic aspects to it. And as we talked about on the lyric episode, Pi Dubois is one of my favorite lyricists of all time. So he's an outside lyricist in this band. Lily is really, really cool. For a great poppy song, Blowing the Blues Away is great. Summer Turning Blue is good for a mellow one. So even they're showing their diversity here. I mean, a little over half of it is pretty riffy hard rock with that quirkiness to it. But and a good recording, Paul Kersey on drums. There's a lot, of debate about, was he a little more meat and potatoes than Gary McCracken and those beautiful tuned toms that you get. Produced by Terry Brown, but again, not up to the same standards as I gotta make sure about that. Yeah, Max Webster and Terry Brown recorded at Toronto Sound. Not quite up to the standards of the next bunch, but a really solid debut, and obviously loads of talent and creativity to this band.
Yep, absolutely. All right, next up for me, number 3 from 1978, the self-titled debut from Saga.
Vinyl of that.
There you go.
There you go.
That cool looking little dragonfly creature, alien thing, whatever. Of course, that creature would adorn most, if not all, of their albums. And a really good one. So basically a prog rock band, but they actually injected lots of pop into their music. They were a lot of sheen on the Saga albums. I think that some like longtime prog fans felt they were a little too much pop, and then you had the big metallic riffing from Ian Crichton as well, so they have this hard rock element going as well. But I always thought this band was pretty terrific. They could write a catchy tune. There were lots of synths on the album. There's terrific shredding guitars and some really, really memorable songs. Here on this one, you got How Long and Humble Stance. Humble Stance is one of their long-standing great tracks. You got The Perfectionist, Give 'Em the Money, Ice Nice. Great songs on here. They would go on to do very, very well in Germany, of all places. Martin, I don't know how successful they were in Canada. They were like, other than Worlds Apart, and they were nobodies here, which is a real shame, because I think that the US kind of missed out on these guys. But fine debut. In fact, their first like 4 or 5 albums are like must-hears.
Yeah, they had a couple of good radio hits in Canada, but yeah, this whole German thing is well known, how they were big over there. And for proggy and poppiness, I mean, well, on more of the prog side, we also had Symphonic Slam, and there was a Quebec band, Offenbach, right? But yeah, it is interesting. Often up here it's Saga and FM and Legat. Remember the double Legat album with White Flags that was covered by Blue Oyster Cult. That's often thrown into that proggy mix as well.
That's right.
So, all right, my next choice. So we're up to number 2. So the second greatest Canadian debut of all time. I've often extolled the virtues of Kick Axe Vices. This is, and there's a single from it. Not the greatest album cover, but I love this album because it's got that Spencer Proffer Pasha sound. They're recording down there for that label. And it's got that icon, Quiet Riot, Wasp, Motley Crue, even though that wasn't Spencer Proffer, but they certainly got that sound on Girls, especially, and Theater of Pain. So this has that. But one cool thing about this album, a couple of cool things. It really does that thing where it seems to hold back. The beats aren't really big. There's a lot of 4 on the floor. Well, the beats are big, but it's not super groovy at times. It's sparse at times. So they're doing that that classic AC/DC for those about to rock thing where they're not giving you everything, and then maybe the song explodes at some point, or maybe you have to wait to the next song. So there's a real sort of minimalist, we're not just going to go for the cheap laughs sort of vibe on this. And the songs all have this really kind of interesting dynamics to them, and just sort of intrigue. Heavy Metal Shuffle was kind of like an over the top heavy metal song, but again, it just like the beat is sort of like just kind of trying to restrain what's going on. The other amazing thing is that they had this great lead vocalist in George Christon, who just soaring high, vamping, all sorts of cool things. You may not, if you're a big hair metal aficionado and you know all these bands. So this is nascent hair metal. This is 1983. If you're into all those bands, you might listen to this and certain things about it might rub you the wrong way, or you think it's a little bit too simple or Kiss-like. There's some really weird adjectives that you could ascribe to this, but it just seems like they really knew what they were doing. And this is a band who had been around since 1975, so they got 8 years into this, that they're putting this together. And the other cool thing is, I think this, as I said with Exciter, and that's why I was getting mixed up with them, I think they had that song Heavy Metal Shuffle all the way back to 1975. So here they are using that term heavy metal and being a heavy band that early on. But yeah, just really classy, early nascent hair metal when these bands had a lot of distinct personality to what they were doing. The Rats, the Great Whites, the Metal Health era, Quiet Riot, Dokken in the beginning. So it really has that kind of magnetism and charm to it. But if you're not buying into it and celebrating it and thinking this is great stuff, or they're quasi hair metal geniuses, you might just say this is stupid. This is Kiss-like or something. So it's an odd one in that way, but it's always been a 10 out of 10 for me. And then unfortunately, they kind of went downhill on the next few albums. But to me, it's a drop dead classic. Kick-Axe, Vices.
There you go. All right. We said more on that later. So here's the later. Moxie, debut, 1975. Everything Martin said about this album is absolutely correct. Arguably their best, or I don't know, this or their second album to me is usually my, like, go back and forth between them as my favorites. But just a really good meat and potatoes heavy rock band. Really good riffing on here. I love the vocals. You got the added bonus of this one. Tommy Bolin shows up and plays a couple of guitar solos on the album. You can tell him instantly, right? I mean, he just sticks out like a sore thumb, but in a good way. And I believe he was recording in the studio next door, I believe doing his teaser album. Not sure if it was Teaser or whether it was Purple doing the Come Taste the Band. I think it was the Teaser album, because I think if he was there with Purple, he wouldn't have bothered with, because he was doing work on his own album. He had some time to do so, to record. But yeah, just a terrific hard rock album. It's amazing how few people actually know of this album, and I think it's one of the unsung debut album, or just hard rock album in general from this particular era. Kind of, I think I usually tell people, if you really like the first Montrose album, you probably like this, because there's a lot of qualities that are somewhat similar. It's kind of riffy and anthemic in the same way. But yeah, really good band that should have been bigger. But Moxie debut.
Yeah, and the vocals on it are amazing. The legendary Buzz Shearman, who dies in a motorcycle accident, I think in the 81, something like that. He's actually out of the band when he is killed in this accident. And Mike Renowski,
Mike Reno.
Yeah, Mike Reno from Loverboy is the singer on the out of the lights, out in the lights, in the lights, whatever it's called.
Album, yeah.
It's not very heavy. It was quite a disappointment, that album, as is kind of Moxie too. But I think Riding High is amazing. But Buzz Shearman has this great voice. It's kind of like a cross between Peter Criss and Ace Frehley, like one of those good scratchy voices. But he's amazing, howling lead singer, and that's one of the key things to it as well. And Earl Johnson's riffs and stuff. So yeah,
first 3 Moxie albums, you can't go wrong.
Okay, so my top debut, Canadian debut of all time, I'm going with Rush. Good good, exciting album. This is a band that had been in operation since 1969. They had definitely paid their dues, traveling all over the place, just like we said about Brave Belt, braving those Canadian blizzards to play high schools and bars all over the place. But it's a good, exciting rockin' debut. You think of things like Finding My Way and What You're Doing and Working Man. Those are probably the three classics out of it. And in fact, most of the rest of it is a little bit old sounding, but it is a 1974 album. But those three songs definitely are of the time and modern. They had, Geddy had those comparisons with Robert Plant, but he's more of like just this really odd, howling, powerful lead singer. So they were a really interesting band, power trio. But for 1974, I would almost say that they had already by 1974 with this album done things that were more exciting than most of what BTO had done and most of what April Wine had done. So, here's a couple other competitive Canadian bands who are now 3, 4, 5 records deep into their catalog when Rush comes out. And Rush for 1974 kind of like takes over. Like they just do a better job of being a modern, exciting Canadian band that I think either BTO or April Wine were at that point.
Yep. Yeah, it's my number one as well. So everything you said and more. The three like great songs on here, and then the rest are good, right? They're good, very dated sounding, I think, but there's no denying the power here, and amazing how quickly once they, John left and Neil came in, how they kind of retooled a little bit and just continued that upper ascent. They kept the heaviness, but they added these other elements, I think, which are not on here at all. This is very straightforward album, but really riffy. I mean, this is when you listen to this, pretty heavy album. I tell you, I talk a lot with my friends and stuff. So everybody knows I'm a big New York Mets fan, right? So our big power hitting first baseman, Pete Alonso, who is like 26 years old, his theme song when he walks up to the plate every game at home is Working Man. He comes up to the plate, all of a sudden you hear dun, 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 and I'm thinking, does this kid actually even listen to this band? How does he know this stuff? But I almost don't care because, man, I get all fired up every time he comes to the plate. I was at the park the other day. We went to see a game the other day, and man, Working Man blasting through the speakers at Citi Field. It's a good feeling to be an old guy like me, to be sitting and watching this young kid, this young star coming up to a song like that. So it's a great debut. Great debut. They will go on to bigger and better things, but this is still, I think, a landmark release. So
yeah, and you make a good point. But by Fly By Night, I mean they made April Wine and BTO look like kindergarten class, right? And then even bands who would come after, like Moxie, Ortiz, or Triumph, again, it was like child's play compared to Fly By Night, Caress of Steel, 2112. They're just on a completely different plane. Whereas all these Canadian bands and Helix, really, for those first two independent ones, and even when they got the major label signing, every other one of those bands still sounded like a band a little bit trapped in the dated barroom rock and roll of the 70s. The old boogie woogie blues thing crossed with the heavy metal. They were all kind of doing that. April Wine continued to do that. BTO kind of continued to do that. And Rush was just like off, where you could really be proud of a Canadian band.
Yeah. Yep. All right. We got some time for some honorable mentions, right? What do you got?
Okay. Well, I do have a couple here. The Pursuit of Happiness, which was a really cool 80s kind of like tough, riffy, power poppy radio band, but they were actually, with the I'm an Adult Now was a big one off of this. Hard to Laugh. There's Mo Berg, the leader of the band, in the middle there. They had two gals in the band, but Mo Berg in the middle he's kind of the main writer. So that was cool. That was a big deal up here in Canada. Go back a bunch of years to Sweeney Todd with Nick Gilder. I've talked about that one before with Roxy Roller, kind of a cool glam band. And then we've got Street Heart's debut from the Prairies again, like Kick Axe. This was a cool band. A couple of guys, or one or two, I don't know, whatever, moved on to Loverboy. But just a really kind of good kind of funky hard rock pop band, kind of hard to categorize. And then a lot of people don't realize that Trooper's debut was actually quite heavy. This is a pretty darn heavy album of a band who would be somewhat kind of like derided and ridiculed for Boys in the Great White Sports Car and Three Dressed Up as a Nine and all these other songs, where, you know, those albums all went like gold and platinum and probably a couple double platinums in Canada. They were a pretty big band after this. They adopted kind of a logo and a look to their albums. But this first one sounds like a completely different band, produced by Randy Bachman. Check this out. It's a pretty heavy rockin' album for Canada in the mid 70s. I had this tucked into it. I thought this was kind of funny, a stapled story. So you got Randy Bachman there in his Vancouver Canucks jersey, and then in the Trooper shot, you've got Ray McGuire there in his Montreal Canadiens jersey. And then also stapled in here, I thought this was kind of funny. You've got a shot later on of Rush just coming back from their UK tour. So you've got Tom Barry from The Office there, and a radio guy, and Getty and Alex in that Rush picture. I thought that was kind of neat. But I bet a lot of people don't know how that Trooper album is a pretty raw and rockin' heavy album, almost to your Moxie levels, I would say, on that record.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check. I've never heard that. I'm gonna go check it out. Cool.
And that's it.
All right. I didn't bring any props for some of these, but I did want to mention them. On the death metal side, we got Cryptopsy, Blasphemy Made Flesh from 1994, and Gorguts, Considered Dead from 1991. Two very, very important, I think, albums on the early technical death metal scene or style. Both really good albums. I think both bands would go on to make even better music, but those were really good starts for them. On the prog side, how about the debut from Harmonium from 1974? More of kind of like a folky album, but still Harmonium on just a couple albums would do some really, really great things. A really cool obscure band that I got turned onto a couple of years ago that I like quite a bit. A band called Thundermug Strikes from 72. That's a pretty rocking album. It's got some good heavy moments on it. I do like parts of the first Triumph album. So depending on where you get it, it's either called Triumph or In the Beginning from 1976. It's kind of like boogie, generic hard rock in spots, but there are some good tracks on that album. Self-titled from Warpig, 1970. That's a good early obscure heavy rock rarity. And you got to mention from 89, Alice in Hell from Annihilator, I think is a very, very good album. Again, long career for those guys, and many people still say that Alice in Hell is their best album. So what else? White Wolf, Standing Alone from 84, good kind of just hard rock album. Another cool prog band, Etc., self-titled from 1976. If you like Gentle Giant, check out Etc. Links, Missing Links from 1976. And last but not least, something I only just got fairly recently, thanks to Ken Golden, who kind of turned me on to these guys, a band called The Spirit of Christmas, Lies to Live By from 1974. Some Rush similarities there. The high-pitched vocals, it's kind of proggy, get some Mellotron, some big riffing and things like that. Pretty interesting band. You can still get that. That's you can get copies of that on CD. They're floating around there. But,
yeah, I actually had a few more notes here too. I'll just rattle through these quick. Cool. So Sword, Metalized. Sword was a really cool band from Montreal. That's a good one. Loverboy. You can't deny how catchy. And,
hell yeah.
Absolutely solid that is for what it is, the type of music it is. DOA, Something Better Change, the Vancouver punk band. Jesus Christ, which I've talked about before, kind of like a big pounding grunge band from Toronto. Let's see. Other artists, I haven't gone into all these records, but we must mention, I guess, the artists, Bryan Adams, Razor, Sacrifice, Slaughter, Our Lady Peace was a big band here. I Mother Earth was a big band up here in the sort of post-grunge end of things. Cryptopsy, Cataclysm, Quo Vadis, Gorguts, Martyr, Neuraxis, Skullfist for later, retro kind of stuff. Killer Dwarfs, Strapping Young Lad, 3 Inches of Blood was a pretty big, they made a bit of a few waves up here as a
good band,
neo thrash kind of band. I believe they were from the Prairies as well, as Into Eternity. That was kind of a heavy band. That's a Prairie band as well. And go back to the Trooper, the band always mentioned at the same time as Trooper is Prism. So
Yes.
those guys. CBC had a list, and some of the great Canadian albums, and I'm sure the debuts are a big deal here as well. Buffy St. Marie, Leonard Cohen, The Band, Mary Margaret O'Hara, Tragically Hip, Eric's Trip, and then in the hair metal end of things, and I don't know or would say put these up super high, but Haywire, Brighton Rock, Harem Scarum, Slick Toxic, Svengali, and yeah, that's it. So there's your full Canadian roundup.
There's a lot of them. Yeah, a lot of them.
Yeah.
So hopefully we mentioned everybody's favorite here, at least at one point in time. But I urge everybody who's watching to down in the comments below, give us your top 5 or top 10 debuts from, excuse me, any of these Canadian artists. And this was kind of fun. We're celebrating Canada Day here today, and I love talking about Canadian music because I think there's a lot of bands that I listen to that I love a lot who are from Canada, and as you've seen today. So,
but it's just another big state, right? I mean, it's literally like, what you're getting from Canada is there's, like I say, no particular sound or whatever. There's nothing.
No, not really. Yeah.
About these bands, it's just Canada has the same population as California, right? So it's just almost like another huge state. You could look at all of this, but I guess it's more like Minnesota. So
yeah, I guess. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's not a specific Canadian sound. It's not like, you're talking about Italy, right? There's a sound of bands from Italy or South America or something like that. But definitely some pretty unique bands, though, even though they're not Canadian sounding, right? So,
yeah. And a lot of diamond albums, right? Like a lot of albums that went 10 times platinum in the States came from Canada. Like a lot of massive bands. People from Canada always, used to talk about that in the industry and be proud of Bryan Adams and Celine Dion and Alanis Morissette and Sarah McLachlan and all.
Yeah, massive here, massive. Yeah,
Drake.
Yeah,
Weekend, right? There's a lot of big acts.
Yeah, and a lot that did decent success for a few years. Like we mentioned April Wine before. I don't think their first album, I didn't include their first album because I think their first album is pretty weak, but they went on to do some fairly decent selling albums here. Triumph did pretty big business here for a couple of years. Various other bands that we mentioned today did fairly well for themselves, but there were some that were just mega successful. And obviously we know Rush was pretty consistent throughout their whole career. Yep. So, all right, Martin, what's going on? What do we got? New contrarian, new podcasts? Anything new that's hitting this week?
Yeah, there was a Contrarians that went up yesterday where Marco and I just had a fun little thing where we built the worst rainbow album you could possibly imagine. So we did that recently. And every week there's my audio podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. And any of the books I've written, any of them that are in print are at martinpopoff.com.
Cool. All right, what do we got coming up here on the channel this weekend? So in case you missed it, because it ran early this morning, the next episode of 4 Fusion Friday aired today. So we're talking about 4 albums that are kind of connected. They're connected from 1977. They're released in 1977. So an album by Al Di Meola, one by Brand X, one by Iceberg, and one by the Dixie Dregs. So that's what we were talking about today. And we actually had Chris Fox from Helmet of Gnats guest starring on this episode. So check that out if you missed it. We've also got, we did a Runaways album ranking last night. We've got the UK Connection coming up tomorrow, where Simon, Stephen, and I will be talking about our favorite and least favorite Kiss albums. That was a lot of fun. That's airing tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we've got album homework assignment on Sunday with Rob Lasanti and Jason Morris. So lots of fun stuff. And then, of course, Hudson Valley Squares on Monday. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube, all together, all the damn time. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good weekend, everybody. See you next week. Take care.